The News Journal Center and Daytona State College are proud to exhibit works from renowned artist John A. O'Connor. It's a journey that explores the transitory nature of the arts, reality, and illusion through the vision of this contemporary realist painter. Welcome to John A. O'Connor's Blackboard Variations.
All of my life I'd wanted to be an architect. From age 3 I think I wanted to be an architect, and I went through the typical college prep courses in high school, math. I had a minor in mathematics and foreign languages and physics, and I got to Sacramento City College and I ran out of architectural design classes to take, and I started taking some art classes to substitute as electives, and I met Wayne Thiebaud and Greg Condas there, and it turned out that both of them were using the art classroom as their studio in the evenings, and I started painting in the evenings there, and I got to know them really well. And I got, I guess, what you would call the art bug. I didn't know anything about art really, and I thought, since I can admit I don't know anything about art, I can be probably a darn good student. I could talk about the architectural aspects of the Blackboard series, but I think first I would like to give you my eureka moment. How did they come about? And they came about because in 1984, as a professor of art at the University of Florida, I was standing in my senior drawing classroom and I was staring at a blackboard. And I was looking at it saying to myself, how did I miss this for 44 years? It was staring me in the face. There it was, the perfect vehicle for my art. And why was it perfect? Because I could paint blackboards and nobody, since they would not have seen the blackboard, had a referent. They couldn't tell what I was painting from. They had no way to compare it. So it had to appear real. It had to appear as not only an illusion, but it had to appear as reality itself. Now, I'm not so sure that the architecture informed that, but it really was a kind of moment where I really looked at an image, and the image was what we use as a teaching tool. It's the iconic teaching tool of the 19th and 20th century. And I looked at it and said, why hadn't I thought of this before as a vehicle to convey any kind of image? What kind of image? It could be a teaching lesson, it could be a lesson about drawing, it could be a lesson about painting, but it could be a lesson about music, about theater. It could be a lesson on political science. It could be a lesson about government. It could be a lesson about international economics. It could be anything. And nobody would know that it wasn't perfectly real because they had nothing to compare it to. My interest in illusion goes back to the time when I first saw that blackboard in my eureka moment, and the idea dawned on me that the difference between what we conceive of as illusion and reality sometimes is really thin. In fact, many people, particularly people who have mental problems, can't tell the difference. And one of the things I thought was interesting is that I studied 19th century American trompe-l'oeil painting at length, and I thought that I really love the idea, but it's really not my kind of thing. It's still life. It tends to be somewhat flowery. It tends to tell a story, but it doesn't tend to be real. Once you get your face up on the image, it tends to break down. So one of the things I tried to do, and you'll see it in the paintings in this exhibition, is that I frequently use illusions of paper, tape, Post-its, and other kinds of things that are so flat on the surface that you want to come up and try to pick them off. And what I'm interested in terms of the illusion and the reality, is going beyond what the 19th century American trompe-l'oeil artists did and provide a context where you can't tell if it's a reality or illusion. In fact, I always have thought it interesting with some of my paintings when people actually go up and try to pick at it. It's a little like the Pinocchio story. It's not that the nose grows longer, but I've watched their fingernails grow longer as they approach the painting and try to peel off the tape. I've used a variety of techniques and different kinds of processes. I used to do all of my paintings by hand, literally with a typical brush. I worked in oils until 1963. I developed a case of lead poisoning using oils. I switched to acrylic in 1964 and have been using them ever since. But during that time, I've switched from using brushes to using an airbrush to using significant number of stencils, masks, devices to block areas, and I've also, since the mid-'80s, been using computer aided design and the computer as a major part of my work. Probably in the 1980s, as far as technical concerns go, the computer was a way to generate ideas. It was a way to kind of clone works and give myself 10 or 15 alternatives. Since 2005, I've used it exclusively to produce these images. So the latest works are all done on the computer and then printed on Sintra by most likely printers in New York. Sometimes they're done in Canada. And then when I receive them back, I paint over them with acrylic. This painting, Blackboard Jungle, was done in 1985. It was one of the first of the Blackboard series, and it's about the film Blackboard Jungle, based on the book by Evans that was done prior to the film and from which the film's score was derived. The film also had a major rock and roll song, Rock Around the Clock by Bill Haley and his Comets, which was introduced to the world actually in 1954. And believe it or not, it was a B-side single to a song that nobody can remember these days. And it didn't really do very well. It wasn't a flop, but the film came out and introduced that iconic rock song, Rock Around the Clock, to the world. And that's really the time that everybody understood suddenly there was something happening in the world of rock. And Rock Around the Clock certainly is the record that really introduced this form of music to the American public. So this painting, Blackboard Jungle, was a painting that came about because art news critic Gerard Haggerty wrote me and asked me if I would be involved in an exhibition he was curating at One Penn Plaza in New York City called Movie Tone Muse Art Influenced by Film. So I thought this was the perfect vehicle. Blackboards, Blackboard Jungle, and a rock song. And so I want to take a viewer through this because a lot of people wonder what O'Connor's paintings are really about. And one of the things that they are really about is that they are to be read in real time. They're not like most visual art. Most visual art you look at and it's apprehended and digested in a second or two. These are about time. They're not to be digested in a moment. They need to be read, literally. So, Bill Haley and the Comets, diagrammatically, right here. Rock Around the Clock, the numbers around the entire picture. Blackboard Jungle, spelled out for you on the blackboard. North Manual Trades High School in an urban ghetto was where this film was located, and it was a film about race relations and growth, emergence of people changing from adolescence into young adults in very, very difficult circumstances. The rat, the urban ghetto, the cat. In Oriental language and philosophy, the attack from behind, the leaping white tiger, but can also be interpreted as the predator attacking the predator in an urban context which is run by the bureaucracy. You go over here and there's an alchemical diagram, an Athenor. Whose diagram is this? An Arabian alchemist from the 5th century named Haley. Bill Haley and the Comets, Haley and Athenor. Green, growth, resulting ultimately, when growth is fulfilled, in the color red. And what do we get? Red tape. And why do we get red tape? Because of the bureaucracy that created the urban jungle and couldn't resolve it. It creates it, but it doesn't solve the problem. So I think if you look at this picture and try to read it, then you'll understand the rest of the pictures in the exhibition much more, because they're not meant to be looked at and digested instantaneously. They're meant to be read. There's a Viking ship in here, a drawing. Why? Because it represents the voyage that a student would take from the beginning through the time frame that he would go through like North Manual Trade School and graduate. And there are a number of other images in here that refer to particular things too, one of which I think is important to point out. There's a very, very faint silhouette here of Nate Shiner, a friend of mine, a really wonderful artist who moved to New York in 1983 and died in 1984, the year that that this painting began to kind of coalesce in my mind. The Blackboard series began to coalesce, but this is a kind of homage to Nate, who was a very good friend of mine and a serious artist.